or inadvertently, or perhaps by design, is the Idul Fitr. It's the end of the fasting, the month of Ramadan, one of the most sacred months of the Muslim calendar. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Creator, advised the Muslims on how to behave, on what they should do in times like this. And so the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked this by his companions. Asked the same question that you just asked me. What should we do? They said, "Oh Prophet, what should we do in the last days of time? What should we do when we're surrounded by tyranny and oppression? What should the Muslim do?" And Apostle of Allah said to the Muslims, he says, in the last days and times, the mosque would be filled, but they would be devoid of leadership. What he was saying is the houses of worship would be filled, but they would be devoid of moral leadership, of ethical leadership. And the Muslims would then have to turn to themselves to free themselves. And one of the Sahaba asked, well, how do we do that? And the Prophet responded, there's three ways that you can deal with your oppressors and your tyranny. He said the first way is to speak out against it. Speak out against it. And if your heart is not strong enough to speak truth to power, then raise your hand against it. And if you are afraid of physical death, and if you are afraid that you will not win, just know that Allah always is on the side of the believer, on the side of justice. And the least way that you could resist this is to hate it in your heart. That's the least of things. So Allah's apostle said that the greatest degree of faith for the Muslim was to speak out against tyranny, to raise his hand or her hand against tyranny. And if you can't do either because you're too weak, or you're too feeble, or you're not strong enough, then hate it in your heart. And right now, we don't even hate the oppression of our people in our heart. We don't. We don't hate what's going on right now in our hearts. Our people are in the streets homeless, without homes, without income, without anything. But we walk by them and we don't do anything. We believe, hey, well, what can I do? And James Baldwin wrote that, they asked him, why does he write? He says he knows that his writings, that one man can't change the world, that his writings probably won't change the world, but if his writings touch one person's heart, then it would have been worthwhile. So what I'm saying to you here is if watching this film touches you to the point where you will raise your hand against your oppressor, against injustice, or if you will just speak out against it, stand up and raise your voice against it, or if you couldn't do none of those because you were bound and held down, just hate it in your heart, that's the least of faith. So what I'm saying is this: we're living in a trying times, and if we do not raise our voice against injustice, if we don't lift our hands against tyranny, what are we going to do? Just hate it in our heart and be oppressed? No, we have to understand that at this point in time where we are at, the only way that we could deal with our situation is we have to stand up for ourselves. We have to stand up for our own integrity. Our job is not to reform white supremacy. It's not to make America better again. It's not. It's to stop our oppressors and exploiters from doing what they do to us. That's power. Huey P. Newton said the power was the ability to define the phenomena and make it act in the desired fashion. Basically, simply saying, the scientists basically look at a thing and they subject it to different conditions to see how it will react, and then they'll define that thing based on how it reacts to conditions. Okay? And that's where we are at right now. We have no power to define our reality, so we have no ability to make it act or deal with it in a desired fashion. That has to change. And the only way we could change that is we have to understand that all politics is local. all politics is local. You have to control the environment and the territory where you live. And in this day and age, as this society begins to break down, you'll see that. Ask yourself, one day if the water is cut off in Anacostia, here, if the water is cut off in Washington, D.C., in the black neighborhoods, if there's no water in Baltimore, if there's no electricity, what would you do? How would we take care of the elderly? How would we look out for these sisters here? How would we deal with our youth? Where would we go? How would we deal with these things? Will we depend on the fire department? Would we depend on the U.S. government? We can't depend on that. We have to depend on ourselves. So what we have to do right now is those of us who have the strength, who have the backbone, they have to stand up and speak out against tyranny, against our exploitation, against our oppression. And those who don't have that heart, who may, for some reasons, feel that, hey, I can't take that risk, then they have to at least support those who do speak out against it, because they hate it in their heart. You see, that's the problem with us. We know that when someone stands up and tells us the truth, it's right. But because we're afraid, and because America is based on fear, America is ruled by fear. We're afraid of everything. We're afraid if we don't pay the rent, we're going to be homeless. We fear if we are in debt, that we're going to have everything confiscated. We're fearful that our children will walk out the door and we might not see them again. We're fearful of everything. Why do we live in fear? What is our season that starts from fear, the poet Gwendolyn Brooks asked. And her answer was, live and struggle and define your humanity in the noise and whip of the whirlwind. It's the struggle that defines us as human beings. It's our resistance to tyranny that make us upright. Not our passive acceptance, not our going along to get along. And right now, we are being challenged by that. We are being challenged by a system that has consolidated its power of white supremacy and conservative neoconservatism for the last 50 years, since the end of the Vietnam War. And now they have reached their pinnacle of power. No, there's no more equating or equivocating on the issue now. Clearly, America is an oligarchy. And the oligarchy is a system that's ruled by the rich for the rich. It is a system based on wealth accumulation. The American dream was always a material dream. It was never a dream of brotherhood. It was never a dream of sisterhood. How can a nation that was founded on chattel slavery and exploitation and imperialism be a nation on the hill that defines humanity and freedom? How is that possible? It's not. So the illusion that America is this great dream and this great, gleaming castle on the hill that everybody is striving for is a myth. The people that are trying to get into this country from Mexico are fleeing the conditions that the Americans created in Central and South America. Okay? United Fruit used to run Nicaragua and Guatemala. United Fruit and other corporations used to run these countries. Okay? And so today, the people have no livelihood. They have no means of survival. So they're trying to seek a better life for their children. They'll pack up their child and rather have her raped 1,000 times by gangs and their sons submitted to the brutality of a favela or a ghetto. They'll encourage them to go find a better life. Go to some place where you can make a life. And they come here and they try to make a life for themselves. But they're not allowed here because America, not right now, under Trump and under these neoconservatives and this right wing, is about making America white again. They said making it great again. But if they make America great again, what does that mean for us? When America was great, we were slaves. America's wealth accumulation was derived off of 450 years of chattel slavery. And we never got any compensation for it. So we all know the story. We all know how we was cheated out of our humanity and our wealth. The question is, what do we do about it now? I just saw a pastor on the television yesterday. I forget his name. He's what's his name? The pastor. He's from down here. A heavyset brother. He's elderly, and he's taking up Martin Luther King's Poor People's Campaign.
Barber.
Reverend Barber.
William Barber.
From North Carolina, William Barber. And I sat there and I listened to him while he was talking at this interview on MSNBC. And I see that he's saying the exact same thing I heard from Dr. King when I was a young man. The exact same thing. That people have to come out into the streets, that people have to stand up and come out into the streets and tell this government that we're not going to allow them to treat us this way anymore. And I said to myself, well, this is like deja vu. Because I know that marching in the streets, in the millions and tens of thousands, will not change this government, will not change the policies of this country. It won't. We marched against the war in Vietnam. And when the U.S. withdrew from Vietnam, the war continued. For another 5-6 years. It didn't end to 1973 sometime? 75. When we saw the Americans hanging on helicopter skids getting out the country. You see? An image that American empire never forgot. They never forgot that image. And they vowed to never let it happen again that way. So they've controlled the media, they've controlled the dialogue, you don't know what's going on. So, in our community, we have to close ourselves into each other. We have to cling to each other. We have to understand that the only power that we have is the power that we have collectively to influence the territory and the land where we are at. We need to fight gentrification with acquisition of our own property. We need to take these buildings in these communities that are empty. We don't need to ask the government. We need to take the black elected officials that we put on the Congressional Black Caucus, you know, that party thing they got going in D.C., where they got the slickest party going on every year, but you don't never hear from them Negroes no more about any issues that are relevant. You have to remember that mass incarceration, where we are at today, happened on their watch. Many of these black politicians that we have today called for more police in the black community, cheered and boosted the war on drugs. Now we know that Nixon's war on drugs was contrived in order to destroy the black community, in order to police the black community, in order to militarize the police against us, and in order to turn people off against a new generation of young white kids who had turned out of the system, turned themselves away from the system, and turned on to marijuana or LSD or whatever. Now what are we looking at? We have over a dozen states where marijuana is now decriminalized. So what was once a crime, what was once considered non-American or un-American, is today becoming legalized. And the prisons are filled with black flesh for petty crimes of drug distribution. Mostly marijuana or drugs of that nature. But meanwhile, there's white kids that's coming up now who would have been drafted in the 60s and fled and would have fled the draft to Canada, who are now marijuana entrepreneurs. So, I'm coming. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that all of these things that are happening around you are personal. Your oppression is personal, it's not impersonal. When a cop kills one of our children, that's personal. That's not impersonal, because it could be your child. And if we don't speak out against it, if we don't hold that cop to account, and we can hold him to account in many ways, but if he's not held to account by the legal system, we need to hold him to account by our system. And that we don't do. So we have to stand up and fight for what we want. We have to hold our politicians accountable. And we have to understand that all politics begins on the local level. It begins right here, right in this community, right out there on that street. So all I can say is, what do we do now? We have to stand up, like Liz Fink said, we have to stand up and fight. That the liberation, our freedom, is in the fight. It's not in nothing else. Forget the victory down the line, the generations. The things for you to do is fight now, while you can, where you can, and how you can. And that's what you have to do. We have to fight.
Wow. Outstanding. That's an outstanding response to my question. Thank you very much, my brother. And
Before you go into another question, I want to add to that.
Oh, sure. Mrs. Nzinga, whatever you
All that Dhoruba has said is all important and all that we need to really be concerned with on a large level. But what you asked, what should young people do? Young people are always on their phones now and they're researching all kinds of nonsense. It's time to research your real history. It's time for you to look back on struggles that have been, and it's time to take what the Black Panther Party did with the 10-point platform and program and start to put it into practice. So what you do is you organize your community, you join an organization or you start an organization. And then you see what the needs of your community is. And when you see what the needs are, you try to find a way to answer the needs for yourself. When we started in the 60s, I myself came into the Black Panther Party, I was a teenager. There was no blueprint for us. Fortunately for you, unfortunately, but fortunately for you, there is some things that have been tried, true, tested, and you have a partial blueprint. But the ingenuity of young people to find ways to do and describe what their needs are in this time is as important today as it was when we were out there in the 60s. We didn't know, but we knew that there had to be a change. And we knew that the change had to start with us. So what you do is you come together and you organize your community, and then you find out what your community's needs are. Breakfast programs are still important. Free health clinics are still important because a lot of people don't have help. And with them not giving us means to be able to care for ourselves through the system, then we have to set up those ourselves. When we were in the party, what we did was we went to schools and we went to doctor's offices and dentist offices and we asked them to donate and volunteer their time. And then we asked people to donate the buildings or we took over buildings. And we put those things in those buildings. So we had a free health clinic. And then we had a bus to prison for all those who have members that are locked down in prison but have no means or way to get to them. And you know what they do? They take you, put you in prison, and they send you 4 or 5 states away, so you're away from your family, so you're isolated. You know, so those things that your community needs you to do, you need to do those things. And the first thing you do is what we used to do in the Black Panther Party. You educate yourself. You keep up on what's going on so that you'll be able to know what it is that you need to do next. You have to keep abreast. And with all the modern media that we have out here now, the ability to get to that, you just have to focus yourself, and then you have to get that information for yourself, and you gotta share it.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Get to the next question.
addendum to that response. Before we take questions from the audience, I'd like to actually respond to many of the things that you mentioned about the struggle being local and basically having to learn about what's going on in order to address it. That's part of what this is about. This is about getting the people in contact with doers, people who did, people who served as examples, so that they can take that struggle to where they've gone and beyond. You have to. I believe that we have to put the young people in contact with their predecessors, people who've done things, positive things in the community, change makers, so that they can follow in their footsteps and take the struggle to another level, on a local level. So we hope to take this film festival from DC, also have one in Baltimore, also have one in Philly, also have one in New York, at the same time going on in multiple cities throughout America, so that the struggle can be local, so that they can understand whenever possible some of the local leaders who did positive things in their communities. So I definitely agree with what both of you had to say to that end. And on that note, I'll defer to folks in the audience. Garrett, you got a question?
So first, I just want to thank y'all for coming out here. Thank y'all for coming to DC and sharing your wisdom with us and your experience and struggle. And thank you for struggling in general. So my name is Garrett. I'm with Pan African Community Action. We're a local organization in DC based in Southeast, and we're pushing for community control of the police in all aspects of Black working class life, but specifically right now, the campaign is community control of the police. Talked to Dhoruba earlier about that idea, and he pushed back on that idea, talking about community control over public safety. And I would like you to expound on that a little bit. And then also, because our campaign, and this is for Bob, Boyle, because our campaign is dealing with referendums and initiatives to get laws, enacted, or to get laws on the ballot. I would like for you to give your insight, because of how much you struggle for political prisoners and your relationship with Dhoruba. How can we engage young lawyers that are new to movement? You know what I mean, and that some of them don't. Some of them have empathy or sympathy towards movement building, and then some of them are completely maybe more so oblivious to what it takes and the sacrifices. How can we engage these young lawyers who are, if they didn't come from privilege, they're privileged now, making however much, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year? How do we engage with these people? So how do we engage with young lawyers, and then the idea of community control with public safety? What's that about? And also, if you can talk about what you do, because we're a Pan-African organization, the internationalist aspect and your work in Africa, and how we can plug into it, not just for myself, but for other folks in the room as well. How do we plug into Africa? Because that seems to be missing from the so-called left in America. People are oblivious of what's going on in Africa. They really have no position at all. They can give you positions on Greece, they can give you positions, in Venezuela, but when it comes to Africa, you hear nothing, So yeah, how can we connect with you and what your work, specifically what you're doing in Africa? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. With respect to getting lawyers involved, I think one of the things that I learned early on was I'm a legal worker in the movement, not a lawyer representing people in the movement. And I think there are many people, young people these days who, I'm a member of an organization called the National Lawyers Guild, which is a progressive bar association, and there are others. But we always saw ourselves as being legal workers in the movement, not being outside of the movement and having our own agenda, that we're just do-gooders. We're working under the leadership of people in the movement. And that's important because that keeps you organized once you get out of law school. One of the big problems is, in terms of having progressive lawyers doing the work, is that a lot of times they're active while in law school and then go out, and get jobs. And there's that, we lose a lot of people between that last year in law school and when you get jobs. Now, it's a different world today than when I went to law school. It was $3,000 a year to go to Brooklyn Law School, which is where I went. Now, you come out of law school and most people have $200,000 in debt, because that's how much it costs. So you have to get a job in order to pay off that loan. And then you get sucked into the cycle of, gee, it's nice to make all this money, and I have to pay it off anyway, and you divorce yourself from the movement. That's a big struggle. But there's no way around, and this is a similarity between when I came up and what's happening today. It requires, and I'm primarily speaking now for Caucasian law students and lawyers, it's a matter of doing what's right in solidarity with the movement at expense of your own privilege. You got to do that. Some of what was not in the film was, I came out, I was an activist. I like to say I was a person before I was a lawyer. And that was true. I was an activist before I went to law school. what got me organized was I was a student at State University in New Paltz in New York. And I was a sociology major, and part of our program was going inside Greenhaven Prison. And who did I meet? This guy over here. And, you know, and so he organized us, and myself and some others, to say, are you really committed? You know, or is this just kind of like missionary work? You know, and that's, that's what I think when you reach out to legal workers and lawyers, it's where is your commitment? And it's not easy, and there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of good people out there. And I think initiatives such as referendums, such as lawsuits around the community control of the police is very important. And that might be the level that lawyer or that law student wants to work on. They may not want to represent political prisoners or be involved in that. And it's important to say, yeah, if that's all you want to work on, that's great. Because in the process of that work, in the process of working with people such as Nzinga and Dhoruba, you become more organized politically. And the Lawyers Guild is a place that I would contact. I think that there's chapters in the DC law schools. There's certainly a chapter I know in Baltimore. And it's important to get them early, before they get sucked in. I think Dhoruba used to say in some speeches to college students in law schools advising everyone when they get up in the morning and look in the mirror to repeat 5 times, they're not going to get me today. They're not going to get me today.
I remembered that.
And yeah, that's what he used to say, yeah, you're not going to get me. Because it really is seductive. That money you can make, it really is. But that's not, and it really starts, as I said when I started my remarks, to see yourself and to organize lawyers and legal workers that you are not separate from the movement. You have to see yourself as part of the movement. I mean, Jerry Lefcourt, who was in that a section of the film, would often say, we agreed with the Panther program. That's why we were doing this work. And we considered ourselves the white solidarity for that movement. And that's what I try to encourage, white legal workers and lawyers to do that this is your role. I don't know if that's and it's not easy yet, but I don't know if that totally answered your question, but, thank you.
Sister too, if she has anything to add to any of the questions.
Well, like I said, being, when I came in the party, I came in as a community worker. So when you came in as a community worker, you learned a lot of things, but you also went out and you tried to recruit other people in. So with your question about how you get some people to come on board legally, we would go to schools and we would get the students from the schools for legal purposes and for medical purposes, and we'd ask them, who they knew that could help us. So what you do is you just go out there and you look for people with like hearts and like minds, just like Bob said. There's a level of commitment that most people who have that kind of ability to lend that kind of work to us, that it's in their hearts, it's in their spirit. It's something that they can't see themselves not doing. It's important. So that's what I would say. I would say just continue to seek out those who not only are professionals, but those who are on their way to professionalism.
I just wanted to answer the last part of your question. I think Bob pointed out, made a very encouraging point when he said that the first thing we have to understand is that the courtroom is a field of battle, it's a field of confrontation, it's a field of struggle. The laws that govern our society are made by men and women, and they can be changed by men and women. And it depends on how we fight and who's on our side of the barricades. And Bob pointed out that he was an activist before he was a lawyer. He considers himself a part of the movement, which means that in political cases, it's not the lawyers really calling the shots. It's the political prisoners. It's the people who are in the dock, who are fighting the fight. And I think Bob made a very cogent point in your relationship to community control of police. Once we identify who the enemy is, we have to go straight at them and jump on them like a panther with all 4 feet. And the enemy of our communities right now in the police department, the major political enemies are the police unions. And the police unions, we have to understand that the police unions have exceeded the boundaries of their mandate when they start to interfere in the politics and in the behaviors of their officers in our community. And we need to sue them for that. We need to bring legal suits against them for that. Political prisoners, for instance, prisoners in general, can't vote while they're in prison. Why? Where's the legal suit in the class action that trumpets their right to vote? You could believe that half of the prisoners that's mass incarcerated right now could vote in their particular areas. Some of those DAs that put them in jail wouldn't have a job. They wouldn't win an election. Some of those judges who are right-wing advocates and born-again racists, they wouldn't have a job. We have to use the legal means that we have available to us to push the envelope of resistance. It's not going to end everything because you know you're not going to reform the system. The system will destroy you before it will allow reforms that will destroy it. So we understand the limitations of reform. So what we need to build is not a reformist movement, but an abolitionist movement. We need a new abolitionist movement for the new Jim Crow. That's what we need. You need to become, if not a revolutionary, an abolitionist. Just like Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass, I think it was, that said the solution to slavery was a runaway slave with a pistol. Now, that tells you a lot. So I don't have to go any further from that. There's one thing that we have to understand, who are our enemies? And the foremost enemy right now, when you talk about community control of the police, are the police unions. We have to break their back. We have to break their ability to intimidate our elected officials so that our elected officials will represent us, not them. And that's why I say all politics is local. Because when an elected official comes up and kisses the behind of the head of the local police union because he wants to be tight with law enforcement, it's not law enforcement in his districts that's going to get him in office, it's us. The police don't even live in our community. How are they going to vote for him? So we have to understand, when I say all politics is local, what that really means. And that's connected to what Bob said about we have to begin to bring lawsuits, we have to begin to bring class actions that will confine and restrict and make our enemy respond to us. And in relationship to the Pan-African part, right now, I just want to say something to the women here. Every hour, 43 women are raped in the Congo. 43 women every hour have been raped in the Congo for the past 5 years. Now there's feminists running around here talking about Me Too. But who stands up for the women in the Congo if it don't be you? They look just like you. Who's standing up for those mothers who are terrorized by U.S. Special Force trained soldiers? The UN right now, their peacekeeping force has been under indictment and under criticism for raping and pimping black women and African women and Haitian babies. Who speaks up for them, if not you? Our politicians, you don't hear a peep out of them about what's happening in the Congo. And right now, as we speak, over 350,000 young women and children are on the verge of starvation, but you don't hear it on the news. 300,000 people on the verge of malnutrition, and it's not on the news. Why? Because your humanity is not newsworthy. Because black people's lives don't matter. It's a question of mind over matter. Crackers don't mind, and we don't matter. And if you don't speak about it, if black women don't stand up and say, we outraged about how women are being treated in the Congo, what policies do the United States have in the Congo? What does the Congressional Black Caucus have to say to you that you elected about U.S. policy in the Congo? The brother asked about Pan-Africanism on the local. When we say local politics, you need to ask your local representative, say, look, I'm an African of African descent. You could believe if an Italian woman was being raped every 25 every hour, 43 women were raped every hour in any European country, it'd be at the headlines, it'd be news. So why isn't our womanhood news? Why aren't black women who are suffering all of this news? Because we don't make it news. We don't stop traffic. We don't take these politicians when they come in here and throw eggs at them, throw watermelons at them, drop bricks on their head when they stand on the corner. We have to make them understand that you can't come back into our community if you don't represent us. And right now, they'll talk about Russia and Trump. They'll talk about Trump and his problems with a prostitute. But they won't talk about what's U.S. policy in Africa because we don't make them. And that's what I have to say about right now. The reason why I'm starting working on the NGO, it's always been my dream to put together a global confederation of the best amongst us in the Pan-African and African community. We have some of the best minds in the world spread across this globe. We are the largest diaspora on the planet. It's the African diaspora. And we're the ones with least power. We got black stars right now, artists, musicians, look at Mayweather. He'll drop $50,000 in a strip club in one night. And we can't put food on a plate and send it to starving people in the Congo? We can't do that? Why? Because we don't even hold these folks who we pay, who we buy their products, who entertain us. They're not bad people. They're not anti-black, most of them. But they're not being put into a context where they have to be a Harry Belafonte, where they have to be a Ruby Dee, where they have to be someone who stands for something besides a rap or hip-hop song or making more money. We have to hold our own selves accountable for our conditions. And with a Pan-African movement like you're starting here, bro, it begins with educating our people about who we are and where we are. The whole of we come from Africa. The whole of we come from Africa. And then I go to Africa, they say, so where you from? And I tell the Ghanaians, I'm from Labone, or I'm from Achimota. They look at me and say, you from Achimota, you Ghanaian? I said, the whole of we come from Africa. So that's the education for that African, who looks at us as a white man, because we got, quote, material sustenance and wealth. If we was to pull up a slave ship right now into Takoradi and say it's going to America, everybody get on board who wants to go to America, the ship will capsize. And they would capsize. And then once they get here, after 2 years, they be talking about how they're going to get their money and they getting out of here. Because this ain't no place for me. I got a home, and my home is in Africa. When you don't have a home, bro, sister, when you don't have a home, it's a hell of a thing not to have a home. To be homeless. And right now, Africans in the diaspora, they have no home. They have no home in this world. We have no place in the sun. And Africa is the richest continent on the planet. Everyone is fighting right now as we sit right here. The syndicate wars are beginning in Africa for the resources of the Sahel, for the resources of the Congo. 11 out of the 15 strategic minerals necessary for the advanced societies are in the Congo, Wakanda, and it ain't invisible. Everybody knows about Wakanda, but who knows about the Congo? And when you look at the picture, where do they focus the camera when it zooms in on where Wakanda